Welcome to Making Movies is Hard, a podcast about the everyday struggles of being an independent filmmaker. I'm Alex Kellerman.
And I'm Ulrich Brissell.
This week we're excited to welcome editor Lawrence Jordan to the show. Hi, Lawrence.
Hi, guys. Good to be here.
Very nice to meet you.
Yeah, hey, Lawrence. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
Seriously.
Yeah, sorry I was a little late. Just, the editor's life. You never get out of there on time.
That's exactly. Okay. I edit too, and I totally relate to that. Obviously, not as cool things as you edit, but, you know.
Oh, don't be too sure.
Yeah. Cisco corporate videos, you know.
That's where the money is, buddy. You got to start somewhere.
Right, exactly. Kellerman, you want to give Lawrence an intro here?
Oh, do I keep reading?
If you want to, or we can skip it.
I thought you would do that.
I only wrote it.
You usually
fine.
do that.
I'll do it. Okay. So for people who don't know who Lawrence Jordan is, he has been a motion picture editor for over 25 years, editing such films as Assassins, directed by Richard Donner, Riding in Cars with Boys, directed by Penny Marshall, and Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, along with a slew of other comedies, dramas, action movies, and all kinds of films. Wow. Lawrence has also edited his fair share of TV, including 9 episodes of NYPD Blue, for which he received an Emmy nomination for his work on the pilot. And I could go on for a lot longer and list all the wonderful things Lawrence has done, but I think I'll stop there and let you talk a little bit, Lawrence.
Yeah, Lawrence, can you give us a little bio on yourself? How do you describe yourself?
Wow. Well, that was a nice walk down memory lane. There were a bunch of movies, and thank you for not mentioning all the unforgettable ones. I'm a film editor. Like you said, I've been doing it for a long time. Sort of got in the old school fashion. I was born into it. My father was an editor and sort of a producer and director, but he worked in commercials.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he worked in New York City in the 60s and did a lot of the sort of all-time classic commercials. Had one of the first big post-production houses, and turns out a lot of these young sort of idealistic liberal-minded English majors wanted to be film editors, and they all got work in my dad's shop, and they went on to amazing feature film editing careers. So, wow. Yeah, I kind of come from that world. I grew up in a trim bin. If you know what an old-fashioned film trim bin is, they used to put me in there when I was a baby, to stay out of trouble.
Wow.
Yeah, it was sort of abusive, but I guess, didn't seem that way back then. And I just, I just knew I wanted to be a film editor when I saw Apocalypse Now at the Cinerama Dome, the week it was released. And
wow, sure.
Yeah, in full 235 glory. And, I just thought that would be a really cool thing to do. Was never a great student, and really didn't have much other direction. And so I went to work and I became a schlepper. And I was a driver, and I answered phones, and I did all of the horrible jobs that people have to do before they start actually working in the business. These things were all related. I worked, like I say, a driver. I worked for a camera rental company, and I answered phones for a editing rental company. And I just tried to, hang out and meet people. And then eventually I got a gig. After that, became an apprentice editor. And worked my way up. That's kind of the old school way of doing it.
And was that in New York or was that in Los Angeles?
No, it was all out here. We moved out here when I was a kid. My dad kind of got tired of the grind in New York, so he came out here and he started a trailer company. And I actually went to work for him as a driver for a while, and then I started hanging out with the editors and seeing what they did, and just loved every minute of it. But that was all back in the film days. And it was a whole different world back then. And what happened was, I really got into computers and the Mac in particular, in around 1990. And,
sure.
And right around that time, the Avid came out, and the Media Composer. And I saw it, and I just was like, holy crap, this thing is the most supersonic, cool Macintosh program I've ever seen. And you can edit movies on it. And I was just really thrilled because it wasn't videotape. Videotape completely repulsed me because there was a bunch of numbers involved, and I was sort of like I loved film, but thankfully I skipped over videotape, and I became like a real expert at the Avid pretty early on. So
wow,
like all of these old school editors would, be calling me and asking me like how to work their printer. And by the way, how do you turn on the Avid? And so I was able to get this gig for Stephen Bochco Productions working on this show called Civil Wars because all of the editors had quit because they just transitioned to the Avid. So I took that job and they really liked me, and I became good friends with the directors and producers up there, and I was off and running. That show got canceled, and then they were going to do the pilot for NYPD Blue, and they asked me to cut it, and it was just awesome because, it's just what I wanted to always do. And it was a fantastic show also. So that was great.
Oh, that's amazing.
Okay,
so,
hold on. I already have something.
All right. I have something too, but you go first.
I have to stop everything for something completely unrelated to everything.
Oh, okay.
You said that Apocalypse Now was the movie that really set you on your path.
Yeah.
So as an editor, what do you believe is the definitive edit? Are you a Redux guy? What's the best cut?
In Apocalypse Now or in any
for Apocalypse Now?
Honestly, there are so many. I mean, that's really hard to say, but I mean, you just get sucked in from the first moment. Those dissolves with the helicopters that just went on forever. Sure. It was just like, truly sort of an otherworldly experience. And,
it's very true.
Onward and upward from there. But, I was a really big fan of sort of like the films from the late 60s. Mm-hmm. And, I was a really idealistic kid living in my studio apartment in Venice when it was still unsafe to live in Venice. And, I just wanted to work on movies that, that were going to just really kind of like affect people and shake them up and move them emotionally and change the world, like movies like The Godfather and Bonnie and Clyde and Dog Day Afternoon and things like that. And hey, well, Deuce Bigelow, Male Gigolo isn't exactly that kind of a thing, but hopefully some people
saw it and loved it.
Exactly. Yeah. They don't make as many of those kind of movies.
I was the perfect age for Deuce Bigelow.
So was I, and that's the scary thing.
But and then sorry, Alric, you had a question also.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to ask about the Avid and like what year it became prominent in the industry, because I guess I just assumed it was much later, but it was in the early 90s when people were starting to use the Avid, for feature films and for TV and everything.
No, you got that right. I mean, because I was like a real sort of digital geek, unbeknown to myself. I loved the Mac, and I thought it was so cool. I had originally had a computer, which was like sort of an IBM PC-based thing with no interface and all this command line stuff. And then I saw the Mac. I was actually working on Little Man Tate with one of my mentors, Lindsay Klingman, and Jodie Foster. And Jodie used to let me hang out in her office and just kind of like goof off on her Macintosh that Apple gave her.
Wow.
And I was just in love. So yeah, I was on it. I was on the Avid really early on, and we a guy named Steve Cohn and I, who cut the first studio feature on the Avid called Lost in Yonkers. But him and I did a film called Teamster Boss, the Jackie Presser story, which was kind of like this mob HBO movie, and they were kind of like really like against the idea, and they really said, no, you can't use this computer to cut it.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it was sort of a battle, a struggle.
Because you would still have to digitize film at the time, right? It wasn't being shot digitally.
Exactly. We did a telecine transfer, and then we had to do this thing called Media Match, which was, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but Apple used to make this program called HyperCard, and it was kind of like a software program that you could, sort of like an easy software program you can program yourself. Anyhow, I didn't program it, but this program HyperCard was used to match the digital transfer back to the film negative. And
Oh wow.
yeah, it was quite an endeavor. We did a lot of consulting with the original engineers, and in fact, the inventor of Avid, who actually became a friend of mine, Bill Warner. So it was just this incredibly cool adventure in filmmaking, as well as software development, and we knew we were doing something incredibly sort of paradigm shift.
Revolutionary.
Yeah, it was
for sure.
It was pretty cool stuff. So, and again, like no one else in town was working on it. There was this one like old school show called Silk Stockings. That was used.
I remember Silk Stocking.
Yeah, they were cutting on the Avid. So they were the only other
Late Night USA.
Right. Jeez, really good memory.
I was there.
They were like the only other people using the Avid, and the picture quality was really crappy, super pixelated and stuff like that. But we did that, and so it didn't really go mainstream until like a few years later. Again, the Bochco people were really early adopters. There's a guy in town named Larry Chernoff who used to run a company called Encore Video. And Larry's a real sort of pretty visionary guy, and he bought a bunch of Avids, and he talked 20th Century Fox and Stephen Bochco into using them on their TV shows. Wow. And they just luckily they hired me. I had actually pitched them to try to like go to work for them a few weeks earlier before I got hired, and they just kind of like shut me down. And
oh, wow.
then there was this big debacle where, like, when they told all their editors they were switching to computers, like all of them except for one quit. And then they called me back and they said, "Hey, we hear you know the Avid." And Larry Chernoff put in a good word for me, so it worked out. But it didn't really get like big time adopted, for a few years later, like into the mid 90s.
Right.
Well, really quick. So after the editing NYPD Blue, on the Avid, did you go back to cutting like film after that, or were you Avid for life after that point?
Yeah, no way, Jose. There was I was completely the Avid guy, and I had no desire to go back to film. There was one sort of short detour when I was kind of consulting on this software product, which was like, pre-alpha, but I was like, I'm going to use this on this movie. And it was completely crashed and burned. And it was kind of a low budget movie. And these guys said, okay, well, you're just going to have to go back and cut it on film. And so I started cutting it on film for like a day. And then I just went to the producers. I'm like, this isn't going to work. I'm not going back to film. So if you want to get an Avid, I'll rent you my Avid for cheap. It was pretty much all digital after that.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's awesome.
I have one more geeky question about the Avid, and then we can move on. It's just because I edit.
I feel like we're going to talk more about it in a minute.
I know. Was just curious. So
you can always cut it.
So back in those days, did you guys? The color correction wasn't done on the Avid or anything, right? It was just the edit, and then you'd have to turn it back into film for it to be color corrected, or how did that work?
Yeah, but we had time telecine dailies, and Encore Video was like one of the best color houses in town. They had really, really great people. So it was pretty slick. We had really good looking dailies, and then we would, match back. They would cut the negative, and they would, lay it down to whatever it was back then, digital beta or something like that, and they'd color correct it off of that.
Wow, amazing. Sorry, I just curious as from a technical perspective. All right, Kellerman, take it away.
Well, the only reason I almost cut you off is because I want to roll it back just a little bit. Oh
yeah, me too.
First of all, before the editing, you were in the sound department on Back to the Future. I have to touch on that just for a second.
Okay, well here's the deal. I was like, I said I wanted to go into the business pretty soon, so I did did like a couple of years of junior college, or actually like a year, and I was just like, no, I got to go work in the movie business. So I was the apprentice editor on Terms of Endearment, and then I was the apprentice editor on Buckaroo Banzai. And yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
which were both really cool experiences.
I'm sure.
Yeah, really fun, really, really nuts. I mean, I have lots of stories about that kind of stuff. But then I was like, I had an early life crisis, one of my many many life crises, and I was like, I'm working all the time. I've got to go do something cool. So like, I took 5 months off and I traveled around Europe. And then when I got back, I was like, I got to get a job. I have no more money. And I heard about a job for these sound guys out in Burbank. They were called Real Sound. And it just happened that the guy who owned that company was a guy named Chuck Campbell, who was Spielberg's supervising sound editor. And he was like this really cool old school guy. And there were a bunch of like nutty sound editors out there. And I spent a year out there working on a bunch of films. And yeah, Back to the Future was one of them. And I just like, again, I just feel like the luck of the draw. I fell in, and we did a bunch of others. We did like you said, Spies Like Us, Three Amigos. Mm-hmm. So like, in sound, I was kind of like working on a lot of movies at the same time. Back to the Future though was kind of like a big one. And we all sort of just, we all got crazy on that.
Yeah, especially for sound.
Yeah.
Three Amigos also.
Yeah, my boss won the Academy Award for, Chuck won the Academy Award for supervising sound editor for Back to the Future. So,
yeah,
wow,
amazing.
That was pretty heady. Yeah. So I was off to a great start. I had nowhere to go but down.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. But so then I want to talk about apprenticeship, because is that first of all, what does that mean? Someone took you under their wing, right?
Yeah, I went to work for Richie Marks, who was the supervising film editor on Apocalypse Now, and on Terms of Endearment, and I kind of knew all of them through some of my dad's relationships from back east, and I was really like, I'm certainly not the smartest guy on the block, but I'm like one of the hardest workers, and basically I would get there before anyone, and I would stay after everyone left. And, if someone said jump, I would just say how high. And so like they like that attitude, and, as an apprentice, you do like all of the menial chores, which, having been a driver and having answered phones, I was, an expert at. But like you do things like coding the film, and, you start to do some syncing, but there's a lot of like resplicing, and it used to be called reconstituting. When they would make changes in the film, you would have to put it back in the film rolls and things like that. Yeah, pretty mundane stuff, but, there's a sort of pride of quality there, of good work, and
of course,
that was the apprentice route. But while you were doing all that, you were sort of by osmosis getting all of the other aspects of the film editing process through, for example, the assistant editors and the editor themselves. Because back then, and this is sort of one of the things from the film days that we don't have as much anymore, we used to be able to kind of like, sort of interface more. Nowadays, it's a little bit more siloed. Everybody's kind of like doing their own thing, and you really don't interface as much. It's just sort of you had to bring film to people, and you had to, stand there and hold the film for people. Now,
right.
Now no one has to hold the hard drives, hold the film. So,
right.
Yeah, it was a really valuable part of the process, as, is assisting, hence one of the reasons I created that course that I told you guys about, Master the Workflow, Feature Film Assistant Editor Immersion, because that was also, and really still is to a great extent, the traditional route of how you became, sort of a feature and television film editor. Man, you worked your way up. It's a craft, and it's a guild. So there was an apprenticeship program, and as much as things have changed, that's still really the primary way people become editors. I mean, yes, John Ottman went to USC Film School with Bryan Singer, and he cut his films back then, and so he automatically became his editor.
Sure.
But, you can count the number of people who have done that, like basically on one, maybe and a half hands. It's the majority of people who become film editors and who are film editors today in features, long form scripted, did it by working their way through the ranks.
That was exactly going to be my next question, is does apprenticeship still exist today? And is it just about answering the right ad, or, meeting the right person so that who will allow you to, who will mentor you?
Yeah, you hit it spot on. I mean, it's really not about answering an ad per se, but it's about developing a network and developing relationships with everyone, from fellow assistants who are going to, like you
Right.
and want to work with you. And then, of course, the sort of holy grail is meeting an editor who you really hit it off with, you can come up through the ranks with, and who eventually might give you a shot at cutting a scene. And with digital, it's so much easier for editors to do that, to kind of let someone cut a scene.
Right.
I'm not saying that it happens all the time. It really depends on the relationship you develop with an editor, and it's sort of like sort of a trust and a confidence level, and it also depends on like how insecure the person is and stuff like that. If they think you're going to take their job,
Right.
But yeah, but that's the ideal. And I always sort of was pretty upfront about hey, I really want to cut. I want to be an editor, and if there's ever an opportunity to let me cut, I really appreciate it. And some guys basically like threw a ton of film at me, and other people were like, that's not going to happen. So
yeah, it just depends on the person, right?
Yeah, I mean, I worked for this one guy in this TV movie of the week for ABC back in the day, and he didn't even want to come to work. He just like wanted to be on his boat all the time. He was like this old school Hollywood dude, like completely opposite from those New York guys I described, who like basically just said, yeah, cut as much as you want. And I was
Wow,
like,
that's awesome,
yeah,
though.
it was crazy. It was a great opportunity.
Nice.
And so what is the difference between apprentice and assistant editor?
Just more responsibilities.
Assistant is the step up.
Yeah, I mean, the shit flows down. So,
Right.
it's less grunt work. It's sort of a more close relationship with the actual editor and sometimes the director. Some films are so big that the first assistant really becomes sort of like a foreman or forewoman, foreperson, managing the cutting room, because you could have like 5 or 6 assistants on a big budget film.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
do small scenes ever get tossed to assistants to edit? Like if it's something like basic, or like assembling the movie or something like that, or doing a rough or something?
like I say, it's kind of like depending on the relationship that you develop with an editor. I don't think like if you go to work for an editor the first week, he's going to throw you stuff. But I mean, it could happen.
Right.
But it's more about sort of developing that relationship, that trust. Probably, would come after maybe working on a film with them. And it also depends on the workload, man. I mean, it's like if the editor is buried, it's great to just sort of like throw like, let's say, a montage at an assistant that, they can really sink their teeth into. Because, montages can be kind of like rabbit holes. And that, in fact, happened on War of the Roses. That whole montage, which ends with, the slamming of the clock, was basically thrown at me because there was so much other film and actual, dialogue scenes for the editor cut that it kind of really took a load off her hands.
Oh, cool.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was nice.
I have one last question about this first topic, and basically having these amazing experiences working on these really big movies as an apprentice and an assistant, like what are some of the big takeaways that you got from those experiences? Just like one or two like things that you learned that you've taken with you on your career.
Well, because I wanted to be an editor, I would do my best to sort of like hang out with the editor and talk about the cut and the performances and sort of like, the subtle details of why they would do something and, what was the thinking behind this. So you really kind of like were able to get into an editor's head. It's not so much like that these days. You kind of like don't have that freedom because you're not sitting behind them holding film trims while they're trying to, move things on a flatbed
Right.
or a steam back. But those are sort of like the really great moments. And, because we were working on some really great films, I mean, let's face it, working with Michael Douglas and Danny DeVito and even Kathleen Turner on The War of the Roses, let's say,
Right.
you know, that was a rush, and it was, you know,
Yeah.
and it was a fairly, you know, big budget film for the time. You know, we had a great DP named Steve Burham who, him and Danny just like went to town in terms of using the camera, and they built these magnificent sets over on the Fox lot. So, you know, just the thrill of you know, I grew up, you know, watching a lot of TV and movies, and, you know, I was kind of a starstruck kid from New York. So it was just like, I was pretty impressed. You know, I was riding high pretty good.
I think anybody would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously.
Really enjoyed it.
Oh my goodness.
But they beat it out of me, God damn it.
Oh, did they? Doesn't sound like it. So, Kellerman, unless you have something,
I just before we move on to the next
Sure.
whole big chunk here, I just want to ask real quickly about the Tracy Ullman show.
Yeah.
I saw that you
Yeah.
were a producer on that.
Associate producer, yeah. That was right after War of the Roses. And, you know, I had worked with Jim Brooks and his company on Terms of Endearment. And then we did War of the Roses. So, you know, I kind of knew Jim, and Richie was his editor. So, you know, I got to know him and his partner, Richard Sakai, who runs, even to this day, his production company. And they were having like some like problems with the mix. The mixes were going on too long, and they, you know, and Richard Sakai asked me if I would come in and sort of like check it out and, you know, see if there's anything that I could kind of like, any solutions I could come up with. And I did it. You know, again, it was fun. It was kind of an exciting time. I had just come off of War of the Roses, and I didn't really have a job, so I thought this will be fun.
Wow.
And it was, you know, it was cool. You know, I kind of supervised the mixes, and I brought them down from like a day to like, you know, 10 hours. And
Right.
yeah, because they were sort of being run by kind of like these guys that didn't have a lot of experience, and, you know, sort of like didn't understand like the schedules, and anyway, you know, it was a lot of fun, and that was the year that the Simpsons were born.
I was just about to ask, were you there for The Simpsons?
Yeah, that was the first season of The Simpsons, and I was always a Matt Groening, you know, fan. I always read his
Sure.
his column in the LA Weekly, and, you know, this show was just, you know, kind of amazing, and they had really funny and great writers, and they were a lot of the writers from the Tracy Ullman show kind of like moved over. And it was a heady time. Yeah, I remember the Christmas party for The Simpsons, the first season, and it was just like,
Oh my God.
yeah, it was crazy. They rented a whole stage on at the Fox lot, and yeah, it was a fun time. It was crazy. And again, you know, they were still cutting that stuff on. They were cutting that stuff on linear tape for the first couple of seasons.
Linear tape. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry, I could geek out forever about this stuff.
Right.
So we can move on. We
could talk about Back to the Future for a whole hour if we wanted to, but let's not do that. So you already covered how you went from being an assistant to editing your first feature, you know, talking about like you just became the avid guy, basically, and that was sort of your way in. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about like how you edited your first feature. Like, how did you approach it? You know, was it kind of an overwhelming experience to be handed a full movie and be like, okay, here you go? Or by that point, did you feel confident and ready to take it on? Or like, you know, just talk us through how you approached it.
Well, you know, one of my mentors, Richie Marks, you know, gave me some advice when I sort of wanted to make the transition. You know, I had done a couple of pictures where I got big films where I got associate editor, additional editor credit. And, you know, I had those scenes on a reel, and, you know, I shopped it around. But, you know, he told me, he said, look, man, if you're going to make this transition, you can't go back to assisting, because otherwise you're going to really, you know, have trouble moving forward. People won't know whether to think of you as an assistant or an editor. That was probably a little bit easier to do back then. I don't know if people, you know, whether they get themselves into financial situations where, you know, they have to work and make a lot of money, because as an assistant on big features, you can make a lot of money. I was making a lot of money on films like War of the Roses and things like that. But I was working, you know, 60 and 70 hours a week. But I decided to bite the bullet. I kind of just realized that, I'll see. And I got a job working for Roger Corman. I cut a film for him called Dead Space, starring Bryan Cranston.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, wow, who would have thought?
Yeah. No, Brian was absolutely, to say he was nobody would be kind, but, it was shot in 17 days. And, I think it had a budget of like $300,000, which seems like a lot of money now. But, Roger was just knocking out like a film a month back then.
Right. Roger Corman was a madman.
Yeah, no. And it was like at the studio down in Venice, right off of Ocean Avenue. And I just embraced it, man. I just went after it wholeheartedly. I slept in the cutting room when I had to, and we cut the movie. They shot it in 17 days, and the movie ended up being only 77 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So we had to steal some footage from like Battle Beyond the Stars and stuff. And
wow.
So which Jim Cameron and Galen Hurd had credits on. So I was like, and I think Dan O'Bannon also, like some real
really? Oh,
legends.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, and they didn't direct it or anything. I think Jim Cameron was like the art director on it. Anyway, I'm pleased to say that I've worked with Jim Cameron in a sort of a removed way, but no, we stole footage from that movie and we beefed it up to about 85 minutes and we finished. It was quick. It was pretty dirty. We were working in a studio, which was sort of like a fire hazard. And I had my first feature credit, so I was psyched. Yeah.
And how many days did they give you to edit it?
I think I had like a month.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that seems long compared to 17 days, but I guess most features are edited in more like 3 months or 6 months or something.
It's usually concurrent with the schedule. So I think they shot for 17 days, and then I had a cut pretty quickly after that. And Corman was a finely tuned machine. They wanted to knock those things out. So there were a bunch of these young junior executives, and they looked at the film, and then we got Roger's notes, and then it was like basically, finish it.
Wow, there you go. Nice.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Yeah.
So was that basically like how you got your next project? Was like, okay, you edited your first movie, now it's like, okay, you could just get another one? Is it that easy, or was it kind of a struggle to get your second project?
So, it was a struggle. And in spite of Richie's advice, I did take another job as an assistant, but I sort of entered it with the understanding that I would be getting to cut.
Oh.
That was my understanding with the editor, Lindsay Klingman, who's kind of a legend in her own time also.
Yeah.
She won the Academy Award for one of the 3 editors on Cuckoo's Nest, and she was an editor on Hearts and Minds and stuff like that. Went on to cut most of Danny DeVito's films and Jodie Foster's films.
Wow.
Yeah, and a really, really awesome lady. She was cool with it. She was like, yeah, I'll give you an opportunity to cut. And we went on to Little Man Tate, and I did a bunch of cutting on that. And pretty soon after that, I discovered The Avid, and then that became sort of like the focus, like my obsession. And like I said, I became an expert at it. And I took another gig with this guy, Steve Cohen, who was actually one of my dad's assistants in New York and came out to California when we moved out here, and worked out of the garage. My dad was cutting trailers and stuff. And we did that first Avid show. And then it was just like, never taking another assistant editing gig. I'm just going to cut. And luckily enough, I actually auditioned for one that I didn't get. They actually had me cut a scene. And I can't remember the name of the show. But it sure wasn't working for Stephen Bochco and ultimately doing in what. So I lucked out. What can I say? And then after that, it was just, I never had to assist again after that, which was cool. Because what happened was after I did the first season of NYPD Blue, shortly after that, Greg Hoblet asked me to cut Fallen with Denzel Washington.
Oh, wow.
Which
I love,
yeah,
by the way.
Yeah,
thanks,
I saw that when it came out on
Me
VHS.
too. Owned it.
I will never forget that movie. Very, very awesome. Great work.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, it was a great experience. And you know, Greg Hoblet, I think, is like one of the real underrated feature directors. I mean, the guy made Primal Fear. He discovered Ed Norton and Laura Linney.
Right,
and
right.
I thought Fallen was a little bit underrated, but I think it just freaked too many people out. It was
Totally underrated.
Yeah,
Totally
but it's
underrated.
it's like really cool, like, sci-fi horror-ish sort of thing, and
Yeah, it definitely has
Denzel
its
Washington
own vibe.
was great.
Everyone's
Yeah.
great. John Goodman. The
Yeah,
editing's
John Goodman, of
interesting
course.
too, because you have to do a lot of cutting, back and forth as people walk past him and the things changing bodies and all that.
Yeah, and Greg loved to do like tricks with with motion and stuff, and he really kind of liked to sort of mix it up with the with some of the in-camera visual stuff that
Right.
he got Tom Siegel to shoot. And then because we finished it on film, we did like a bleach bypass process, which like only the most insane people were doing.
What does that
creative.
mean?
A bleach bypass process is it's a photochemical process where you do something that can, like, I don't really know the exact description, but it's something where you can actually destroy the negative, and it's really dangerous. And
Really?
you get this super rich sort of contrasty sort of chiaroscuro look, and yeah,
That's interesting.
it was really awesome. And now, of course, you can apply that with a plugin in Resolve. So.
Right.
Right. How times have changed.
Wow, that's interesting. That's why that movie looks like that? What? Okay,
Yeah.
What other movies have done that?
Yeah, I think like Storaro used it a bit, and just like some really visually
Interesting.
really amazing people.
So Lawrence, I don't know if Fallen's the right movie, but what I wanted to do was like have you kind of take us through your process of editing a project and what your experience is like as an editor,
Well, you
on
gotta
a
pay for
movie
the class.
like that.
Yeah.
Oh,
To get really into the process.
Yeah, no.
well, I don't know. I mean, but just like to basically tell us like how you approach a piece, and if you don't, if that's too much, I don't know.
No, it's not too much. And actually, we haven't done that class yet. We've really only focused on the assisting part of it. So I love to talk about editing. It's a kind of a trip because I was a bit of a, and still am, a bit of a high-strung kid, and I was really anxious and wanted to prove myself back, even into cutting things like NYPD Blue and Fallen, and my approach was sort of fraught with a lot of insecurity in the early days, so it's changed a lot, and so that was kind of like how I approached it then. But how I approach it now is much more sort of relaxed. You get a little older and you stop really giving a serious shit about certain things and people's opinions, and you start feeling like well, if this person doesn't like my work, they can fire me. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
Wow.
Eventually you'll get another job doing something. Whatever. I'm sure it'll be editing. So because I really can't do anything else. And anyway, I mean, I'm not trying to be arrogant or anything, but my approach nowadays, it comes from a place where I just really like to watch the film, watch the dailies, and just see what hits me and just start throwing stuff together, which is really not a lot different than the old days, except I'm just not ridden with the anxiety of,
Right.
every cut. Is this the right choice? Is this the right performance? Because, frankly, I think my instincts have gotten, better over the years about performance. And also, my father told me something when I was a kid, which, it kind of like, it just rings so true nowadays, which is it's only splicing tape. And it's even better now. It's only a version in the Avid. It can be changed so quickly. And,
Right.
I don't sort of get attached in an egotistical way anymore. I think like, maybe when you're young, you're like, oh, that cut is so good. How dare they change that cut, or they're such idiots. Now it's just like, I enjoy the process so much more of like, making my first assembly, my first cut, putting as much of what the director did into it so he can or she can see all of the material, in its full glory. So usually the cuts are, they're long,
Right.
they're not painfully long, but you cut the script and you go with your instinct and you kind of you don't fret, because nowadays with digital, you're getting buried with so much film that there's no time to fret. You just got to keep moving on to keep up with the schedule and with camera. So, it's like much more of like an accepting attitude about, what I put together in terms of like my first assembly and stuff like that. And, it's really sort of just going through the material. Over the last, few films, I've been working, with Marlon Wayans and crew and this, the same director, Mike Titus.
Oh, nice. Are you able to say what movie that is?
Yeah. It's called Sextuplets, and it's coming out in middle of August. Marlon.
Oh, nice.
That's great.
Marlon plays 7 roles. He's
oh my goodness.
I think Marlon Wayans is super talented. I mean, I like all the Wayans brothers. But
no, he's crazy. But like, what happens with Marlon is that, like, he'll deliver a joke like 5 different ways, and you'll have to cut it 5 different ways, and you'll have 5 different versions.
Right.
And basically, you decide which are the best 2 or 3, and you try to make sense of them in like sort of a scene structure. And then you have 2 in your back pocket. And, so cutting improv comedy is such a different kind of experience than cutting a dramatic film. Because, most of the time those people stick to the script for
drama.
For the most part. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For drama, for action, for pretty much for anything except for improv comedy. And most good comedy is, comes out of improv.
Right.
So it's just sort of plowing through the material. And again, getting back to like what the assistants do nowadays. I mean, they shot 200 hours almost 200 hours of dailies on this film that I'm just finishing.
Wow. Incredible.
Which ended up being a 90-minute movie. And,
right.
So that's a pretty brutal ratio. So it was really important, and it is really important for my assistants to sort of catalog and mark up the material so I can not lose my sanity when I'm looking for things. Everything is put into this Avid program called ScriptSync, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but basically it's sort of a way to, instantly access every version of a line.
Oh, wow.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. It's pretty powerful.
Like an auto labeler?
I don't know I'm not sure what an auto labeler is.
Well, no, I just kind of made that term up to describe something that auto labels film clips.
Unfortunately, no. What the assistant has to do is actually go through. They're able to.
They still manually label.
They're able to input the script into this program, ScriptSync. But again, what we're talking about shitloads of improv. So they add like every line of improv, verbatim. So when Marlon says, "Hey, what about the time I said this?" And, then I just type in this,
you just quick search
and then
it.
Boom, it comes up in this program. And every time he said this in a take or over 2 or 3 takes or whatever, I just click on it and boom, there's that line. Boom. So there's this process of cataloging and organizing the dailies now.
Wow.
That's a lifesaver. I mean, because nobody looks at dailies anymore. There's just too much. And, you're just spending too much of the day just trying to cut the material.
And that's by virtue of it being digital. So we're not worried about wasting film or not having enough film or whatever.
Digital cinematography, absolutely. You don't have to you don't have to process the film.
You can just film and film and film.
It doesn't cost anything, so they never turn off the camera.
Right.
So what is that ratio compared to like, working on a film like Fallen or Assassins or something like, 200 hours of footage to a 90-minute film? Like, what was it in the old days, roughly?
You can't even compare it. It's
Okay.
Yeah, he'd have to measure it in feet.
Yeah, no. But I mean, like, if I was to convert it into hours, maybe there would be what was that old, sort of like ratio thing? People would say, like, maybe they shoot 5-1 on a feature or 6-1 on a feature, and they shoot they shoot 20-1 on a commercial, because like a commercial, like
because it's short.
And they just
right.
Same production schedule, but short.
Yeah, exactly. So it was just a fraction. I mean, if we had an hour of dailies when I started out, that would mean 6 rolls of film you would have to sit through.
Right.
Either after they finished shooting or at lunch. And that was a lot of dailies, 6 rolls. So we're talking about getting like 20 or 30 rolls of film a day.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's brutal. They never turn off the camera. So I'd have a lot of takes that would run like, the card, those red cards or whatever they are.
Mm-hmm. The red mags.
Yeah, they only hold, the ones we had only held, at 8K, only held like 33 minutes. So
right.
that would be a take a lot of times, and
oh my God. Wow.
Yeah. So it's like this thing that a lot of people, as much as people have learned about editing because of, the Avid, Final Cut Pro, Premiere, and what have you, the feature film, sort of experience as an editor is really sort of like a trip. It's kind of like being on acid sometimes. So
you're obviously an Avid guy, but how do you feel about Final Cut? I cut on Final Cut. I'm just curious.
Well, I was a big evangelist for Final Cut. I actually started one of the first Final Cut websites called 2pop.com. I don't know if you ever.
Wow.
Did you ever heard of two? Have you? You're probably too young, but
I have not.
No,
heard of that.
I'm not have True Pop either. No.
Yeah,
I wasn't editing back then.
Yeah, no, it was a big one back in the early days. It was. I was actually a consultant to those guys. Before they went to Apple, and then after they went to Apple, I did some consulting on Final Cut, and
interesting.
And I started this website because I was so jazzed about it, because there was going to become a program that only cost $1,000.
Yeah,
$900.
That's how they advertised
that. $999 for Final Cut, and I was so psyched.
Yeah.
I was so excited that editing was going to come to the masses, and it was going to democratize the medium. You didn't have. I mean, I spent $120,000 on my first Avid, guys. You know what I'm saying? So this was like a big.
That's so crazy.
So I loved Final Cut. I loved what it represented, and of course I loved Apple, so they could do no wrong. And it rocked, and I cut a couple of features on it, up to 7, and then when they switched over to 10,
right, when they turned everyone against them.
Well, I didn't go against them. It was just like I just didn't have time.
All your plugins were bad.
I just didn't have time. I didn't have time to learn the new paradigm. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, they kind of made it like iMovie, basically. They turned Final Cut into iMovie. No,
that's only
roughly.
aesthetically, Alric.
I mean, I don't know. I cut on X twice, and I don't think I'll ever do it again. Just because I don't know. I just can't do it. I'm just so used to.
It's definitely its own workflow.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Now,
I was just curious.
Now I'm a Premiere guy, so
honestly, I would love to learn Final Cut X. I think the whole magnetic timeline idea is really interesting.
It's great.
I'm friendly with some editors who've cut some features in it, and they love it and they rave about it. And of course, the integration, with Apple products is really tight.
Right.
So that's a big win. I've worked a bunch in Premiere. I like it a lot. Again, it's that similar metaphor. And what I love about Premiere is that you can pretty much throw anything into it, and it'll make, it's like a blender that'll make a great smoothie every time. It's just like it can handle all kinds of different formats, and and I use it sort of for like my personal work. I cut the course on it, and I think that they're really trying hard to make some inroads in long form, and I think they are. Let's face it, they're a $138 billion market cap company. They're definitely somebody to contend with. I don't think they're going anywhere. You know what I mean? So I think it's important for people to learn as much software as they can, whether it be Premiere, Final Cut,
learn all
certainly the Avid.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I want to go back to the process question again, because kind of how I meant it was more like literal. Like, do you watch dailies? You basically said you don't anymore in the digital era, that you don't really watch all the dailies, and you just get in Do you already have selects that are, picked from set that are marked for you by your assistants, or
no?
Like how does that work?
No. So what they do is they organize the material, they mark it up, and they comment on it. When I say mark it up, they have to put markers on every time an actor will reset in a take. So if you're in a 33-minute take, an actor might reset their line, 5 or 6 times per line sometimes, just depending on, that's certainly the way Marlon works. So they'll go through and basically, I do watch dailies. I don't mean I don't watch them at all. Obviously, I've got to edit the film, but I sort of I do a lot of high speeding through them. And, as soon as I find sort of a performance that seems pretty good, I'll start building out a select reel. Sometimes I'll have 3 or 4 readings of something back to back in a row. And then if Marlon gets into a groove or an actor gets into a groove, I'll start intercutting, just dialogue stuff and basically try to make my way to the end. But it's never necessarily like that. Sometimes I'll just be looking through the stuff and I'll see something that's really funny, and it might be for, towards the end of the scene, and I'll just pull that.
Right.
And, I'll just start, I'll just start selecting stuff. And, I'll goof off on that for quite a long time. And basically what I do is, I sort of get myself into a jam time-wise, and I have this internal clock that says, hey, you better stop screwing around. You really got to finish this scene. So, it's kind of like this self-imposed deadline.
Yeah, you're usually working by yourself, or are you constantly cutting with an assistant or with the director in the room?
Not during the assembly, not during the production. No, I'm completely by myself. The temptation is always there to check your email and shit like that. Of course. And you really, obviously, when you're getting buried in that kind of amount of material. So it's just like this selecting process, and then, looking for pieces that I think might be better here and there. The first cut, the assembly part, is really kind of in a certain respect, it's like the most creative part, because you just get to kind of if stuff isn't working or, isn't as scripted, you kind of, or stuff isn't working in some respect, you can kind of just make shit up. And that's fun.
Are you working off of notes from a script supervisor or anything, or starred takes or any of that kind of stuff? Or are you just kind of just looking at everything and going through all the takes and just watching everything? Well,
depending on, how good the script supervisor's notes are. Yeah, absolutely. I'll reference them. But, I pretty much, I'll just go off on my own tangents to a great extent. And, I'll put something together, and then sometimes I'll go back and I'll check the notes and I'll see if there was anything that, was pointed out. But, Mike's so busy on the set, and, they have to get so much done per day, especially on a film like we just finished. It was so intense with Marlon playing all these different characters that the days were long, and he didn't have a lot of time to give me a lot of, specific notes. There were very specific notes about the visual effects stuff, because that had to be done in a certain way, but not really performances, more in general takes and things like that. So it's a combination. Again, some directors are much more specific, but again, with a guy like Marlon, you can't be, because he's throwing so much stuff against the wall that, it would be impossible really to make notes.
Right.
So you just sort of dive in and you just throw something together. And, this is my 3rd film with these guys. So, thankfully they've been, they like what I do. So seems to be working out. Yeah.
Nice. And the other 2 were Naked and 50 Shades of Black. Is that right?
Yeah. And those were fun.
Nice.
50 Shades of Black was a blast because it was like a real low budget movie. And
oh, really?
Yeah,
it's very, very funny. I saw it last year.
Yeah, no,
that cracked me up.
It's crazy. And they shot that in I forget, 25 days, and it was under $5 million.
Oh, wow.
And
wow.
But it was the same thing. I mean, it wasn't quite as much material because obviously they shot for half the time, but it was still a lot of material considering. And we had to put an assistant on at night just to keep up and stuff. But it's kind of that was sort of a little bit of a throwback to I don't want to say the Corman days, but the old days where, there was, the smaller films, there wasn't any money, and it was a little bit more guerrilla. And we had a lot of fun. I mean, so much crazy stuff got cut out of that movie just because it was completely inappropriate.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of like, I'm sitting there watching, some dailies. I remember one night I'm just sitting there watching Marlon just go off on a tangent, and I'm like literally laughing so hard I have tears in my eyes. And I'm just like saying, I can't believe I get paid to do this. This is like insane. And, trying to make
That's awesome.
Trying to make sense out of it. But it was fun because it was like quick and dirty, relatively speaking. I think we finished that film in like 4.5 months. And I developed a great relationship with those guys, and we're good collaborators and good friends now. And it was fun.
Nice. Awesome.
God, I'm rambling on about shit, aren't I?
No, this is great. I have a million questions. I'm waiting for Kellerman to ask questions because he's been a little quiet over here.
Well, I think we got to start working towards the end here. But
I don't know. I mean, well, I guess we probably should, but I mean, I still have more process. I have some process questions, All right. Well, you take us wherever you like, Kellerman. You guide the train.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I want to get to now. Is Sex Talk Blitz what you're currently editing?
Yes. Well, we just locked picture. It's like I'm describing it as a completely new kind of visual effects movie. We have nearly 1,400 visual effects shots in it.
Holy moly!
Yeah, it's insane.
And what is that? Is that face replacement?
No, there's some head replacements, but a lot of multi-layered comps. I mean, we have a lot of like shots where Marlon is playing 7 characters in the shot.
Wow.
And then there's shots.
And it's just a still camera?
No, it's a moving camera. It's motion control.
Wow.
So that's what makes it kind of so cool.
So cool. Yeah. Motion control.
Yeah, Mike is a really good visual artist, and he's got an art school background, but he's also like this completely get your hands dirty, I know every toy and gadget on the set kind of guy. So I think he drives some DPs crazy, but he's like this one of these, I think, is like a new breed of director who, you come up, knowing, being able to make a film with a DSLR, and just think about it. I mean, people didn't have that opportunity back in the old days. I mean, if you were to get, able to rent a 16 millimeter camera, that was a miracle. Now you've got these freaking dollies and gimbals, and they're also cheap, and you can get your hands on them and stuff. So anyway, Mike is really, really well educated on all aspects of the directing job. And he really went to town, and he made a very visually interesting comedy that has a crapload of visual effects. Everything from, like I say, multi-layer composites, head replacements. We got a CGI bull in there, and we have lots of blue screen, stuff shot on stage, makeup fixes, just crazyville, man. Just I get tired just thinking about it. Wow. These poor visual effects guys have been working like 7 days a week for weeks.
I love that. And that's almost like a practical effect in some ways.
Yeah, that sounds fun though. Cool. To get to edit something like that with all these moving pieces and, new types of approaches to do visual effects and tell a story, especially in a comedy of all things. Like, that's super cool.
Yeah, and like, again, it's sort of like a big leap forward from like the things that Michael Keaton did in Multiplicity, and even Eddie Murphy did in
Eddie Murphy. Yeah, I was gonna say Nutty Professor.
Yeah, it's totally a different experience. You guys are gonna trip when you see it. Some of the tricks that Mike pulled off, and
nice.
It's a lot of fun. So I think just by virtue of that, and plus Marlon is nuts. I mean, he just like he will click into another character, like so committed and so holy that he's really quite a talented guy. He actually is in New York now doing Sofia Coppola's new movie.
Oh, really? Oh, awesome.
Yeah, with Bill Murray and Rashida Jones. So
oh, that's cool.
I think he's kind of coming into his own, and he's got a lot of career left in him. So yeah,
nice. So Kellerman, take your last question then. And I'm getting ready for mine.
Well, I mean, my next question is actually just to learn more about his class. So if you have anything before we get to that,
well,
then let's go ahead and start with you.
Okay, fine. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about back to your approach again, going from different genres. So you just kind of talked to us about how you approach a comedy, but is it any different when you work on a drama or an action film? Like, is it the same thing where you put multiple things together to show the director, in your assembly stage, or is it much more like controlled because there's not that element of improvisation? Or talk to us a little bit about how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's not as you're sort of like looking more at the subtleties of performance. I mean, you're always looking for the subtleties and things like that, but you're sort of more adhering to the script, and they're usually adhering closer to the script. So you sort of get to I don't know, maybe sort of concentrate on story a little bit earlier, maybe. But it's a very similar process. You're sort of letting the film speak to you as you watch it, and you're finding what resonates with you, and you're basically going with your instinct, and you're solving problems. I mean, that's what an editor does, whether it's a crazy visual effects film or a dramatic piece. You're trying to solve problems. Sometimes that they don't know about because of that it just didn't come out until you see it on the dailies. But I think, again, the approach is very similar. You're just looking for the best material, and you're hoping you have good performances. And when you don't have good performances, you try to create them out of what you do have, and whether that's cheating lines or cheating words or syllables, things like that.
I was gonna say, people probably don't realize how much the edit can affect a performance or a scene.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, like, if you've got an actor that's in a dramatic piece that's sort of like taking big pauses between every line, you can actually speed up the pauses, and nowadays you can make that pretty seamless. So it's a different set of problems that you're solving, but I think overall it's the same job. It's just probably, not as insane, depending, but a lot of times, these, dramas will be, they'll be sometimes more independent, maybe not as big budget. So they'll have their own set of insanity, like crazy schedules, or, you still have to solve the issues. I mean, depending on how long the script is. I mean, Riding in Cars with Boys was, the first cut was 5.5 hours long.
Oh my God! Seriously?
Holy shit! Holy,
yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, so sometimes you.
Oh my God!
You'll work on
wait. So how did that happen?
Just sort of like veering off the path. The scenes that were shot that ultimately never needed to be never needed to be shot. Actually there was quite a bit of improv with Drew and Brittany Murphy.
Wow, interesting.
I think I'm just trying to think of some other films that a 3-hour first cut is not surprising. The first cut on cut on this film was about 2 hours and 45 minutes. Right. Which was pretty good.
Right, yeah. Fallen is a pretty long movie. That must have been a long first cut.
that was easily a 3-hour first cut. So again, you're dealing with sort of a different animal, in that you've got to bring the story into some sort of manageable time frame and still be able to tell it, as elegantly as possible. In War of the Roses, Danny actually asked me to come on after they had, we had finished the film, just to put together the DVD extras, if anybody remembers what those are.
That's cool. I still watch them.
Yeah, I love those.
And he called he called it "Killing Off My Little Darlings," and it was just like, I don't know, it was probably like 25 or 30 minutes of just stuff we had to cut out of the movie that was really quite spectacular. And
yeah, now you get to see them.
Yeah, and this is an interesting thing, because sometimes Marlon gets. He doesn't want to cut a joke or something like that. And the problem, like on this film, wasn't that we didn't have enough jokes. It was that we had too many jokes. You know what I'm saying? So you're really trying to figure out the jokes
what's the best joke
that flew the best and got the biggest laughs. And we had 2 previews, so we got a pretty good idea of what the audience was resonating. They were resonating with. So. But it's again, that's just another set of problems that we as editors and filmmakers have to solve. It's like you got too much good stuff. That's like a really good problem to have, though.
Right.
One really quick follow-up question is, so when you have, let's say, like your first cut and it's 5 hours long or 3 hours long, are you sitting with the director at that point to make the cuts to cut it down, or is it your job to just start making suggestions on, like, well, we could lose this scene, or maybe we could cut this part down in half, or maybe we move this around, or is that something that you do explicitly with the director?
Oh my God, I'd kill myself if the director bailed after a 5.5 hour first cut.
Well, not completely, but I mean, if they're like, okay, get it to be 2 hours or 3 hours, then call me or something. I don't know how they would work.
It's possible there are people like that. I've never worked with one. Usually, the director is really, pretty excited and anxious to get in there and start working. And, again, it's my job as the editor, and it's our job as editors to really, help them, mold their vision. The first cut is just that. It's just the first, draft. And as we know, there are many drafts after the first draft until you get to the final version. And it's a process of trying all kinds of different things. And, there's all kinds of different things that I miss that Mike, had in mind. And we worked through and we worked those things in. And sometimes the reason I did it was because this is the problem here or here. And, it's just this really satisfying, most of the time, creative process, that give and take and collaboration. And, again, this is part of the sort of the nice thing about having done this a long time and getting a little bit older. You don't get as married to a certain cut or a certain way a scene was cut, and you're really more open to like improving it and sort of molding it into its best version, because ultimately you're there at the service of the director, and you want to help him or her make their best film, and that's cool with me. I'm that's what I'm here for. So
it's a great attitude.
Yeah. No, I just I want to have a nice a good experience. And again, that's one of the joys of hooking up with a director that you work with over and over again. I mean, my friend Mike McCusker, who I know from the old Gracie Films days, he's doing another film, a great film with. It looks like a great film. I don't know if it is. I've only seen the trailer, but with James Mangold, and those guys have made great film after great film together. And obviously, that's the kind of relationship that an editor,
right,
if they get in their career, is really, really lucky to have, because it's sort of like it's one built on trust and mutual respect for their crafts, and it really makes it great. After a lot of years of sort of bouncing around and not getting into a groove with a director, working with Mike has just been an awesome experience.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Wow, good advice. Find a groove if you can.
Yeah. Because it's going to be a fight anyway, so you'd rather not be miserable.
Right. All right, Kellerman.
Well, okay. So my final question is: you mentioned your class a couple times, but
yeah,
what is your class?
Well, on Naked, I was working with an assistant named Richard Sanchez, who's an awesome guy, a top-notch assistant, really smart guy, who I met when I did a film called Flock of Dudes. And
great title.
Yeah, it was a small film that Chris D'Elia was in, and sort of an ensemble comedy. And Richard was just like reminded me of me back in the day. He was just really into technology and whip smart and just could like solve any problem. That's what I'm looking for in an assistant. Just somebody, you throw a problem at them and they're just like, they don't even bat an eyelash. They just go to work on it. So Richard was that kind of guy. And we came back together to work on Naked. And, he had developed this thing called, it was a FileMaker Pro database, actually, that keeps track of everything in the freaking movie. And we used to do that in the old days in a big old, paper code book, it was called.
Right, physically.
So, we called it the digital code book. And we were just talking, and we're just like, I was so impressed with what a great assistant he was. And people used to come in and sort of sit over Richard's shoulder, and he was cool with that. People who wanted to be assistants. It goes on all the time, with certain people, and they call it shadowing. Can I come in and shadow you? And, I took note of this and stuff, and I said, and having developed a few websites and always kind of like been into this stuff, I'm like, hey, Richard, we should come up with an online course. I think we should really create an assistant editing course, because there's no course where people can learn really what happens in an editing room as an assistant.
Yeah, so true.
It's like you don't learn that in film school. I mean, maybe you get a little taste of it in some of the production classes, but real world, in the trenches, what it's like to be an assistant editor. And, to make a long story short, we talked about it a little bit. We kind of like looked at each other and we said, hey, maybe it would be a good idea to like, throw up a weather balloon and see if people would be even interested, because we had no idea. And we put this little thing on a Facebook group, and we got 300 responses in 48 hours. They would be really,
wow.
They really wanted this information. And so we built the course, and it's 6 modules. It's 33 lessons now. We added one. And it's like almost 14 hours of material that takes you through the entire process, everything from, sort of like your first meeting with your editor, through pre-production all the way through final delivery. It's like every step of the way, the set of skills that are required to be a first assistant on a studio feature or an independent feature or a network or a streaming studio's television show.
Really, film and television?
Yeah, sure. Because let's face it. HBO doesn't have.
You do both.
HBO doesn't have commercials. Netflix doesn't really have commercials. Even streaming networks that have commercials just drop them in. They don't even have the act breaks and the bumpers.
Right.
That's really only for network stuff right now, which is kind of becoming sort of like just a small segment of all the content that's out there. So anyway, we put this together, and what we really wanted to teach people was that, being an editor and being an assistant is really sort of like a combination of 3 things. It's obviously the creative, and there's a very strong technical element, but there's also a really strong interpersonal and maybe you want to say diplomatic or political element.
Definitely.
You've got to learn how to get along with creative people. You've got to learn, when the best time to keep your mouth shut is. And
do you talk about this in the course?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, we have a whole lesson on editing room diplomacy.
That's amazing. Well, okay, so where is this?
Oh, it's at mastertheworkflow.com.
Mastertheworkflow.com. Okay.
Yeah.
Alric, you'll put that up on the site?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Episode notes?
Yeah, and just so you know, we only open it up like 4 times a year because basically.
Oh, you can't just join anytime?
No, it's best if you sort of just try to do it when we're open, because the idea is that we try to do it like quarterly, about depending on how busy we are, but like. Last quarter, we were too busy, so we didn't even open it. But we try to do it like quarterly. So Richard really does most of the assistant technical support. I try to, chime in when I can. He's much more sort of, in the moment, so to speak, in terms of, the assistant's role. But we want to be able to support people. We want to be able to answer questions when they ask them. So we have one of the things you get with the course is a private members and alumni only Facebook group that, Richard's very active in as much as he can be, but that's
cool.
Still pretty active. And we want to make ourselves available by email and things like that. And
so it's actually interactive.
Yeah. I mean, we really, sort of part of my personal mission is to really try to mentor people and be there for them. Like, for example, some people have, just reach out to me and sort of ask for advice. They're going up for a job or something like that. They're thinking about maybe making the transition to editor or trying. And, I try to give them advice,
That's great.
And, we sort of like don't advertise that, but what's kind of happened is that we've developed this really nice community of people who really want to be editors. It's like they're not people who are editing because they want to be a director or a writer, which is fine also. But, it's like my philosophy.
Yeah, you want the editors.
Yeah, it's my philosophy. It's Richard's philosophy. It's most people who really, our craft is pretty, demanding. And, my philosophy has always been, directors direct, writers write, editors edit. Don't try to be two things at once. And I think that's sort of like some of this, I don't know, I'm going off on a tangent here, but, sometimes you come out of film school and you think, well, I'll edit until I get my chance to direct. And again, it happens, but, editors don't want to hear that,
Right.
And neither do others, assistants busting their ass 80 hours a week. So,
right.
We just try to support people, and the people who really want to, it's kind of weird because, you can really smell it when somebody is going to do it, going to make it. They've got this certain sort of attitude. I met a kid this weekend who I thought was just at the Ace Tech Fest. As a matter of fact, we had a booth there, and, again, it was just a way to meet and hang out with some of our students and meet hopefully new students. And, he was just this guy, and I just thought, this guy gets it, he's just one of those people who get it, and this guy is going to be an editor someday. So, we just try to encourage that and try to have some fun doing it. We also offer scholarships we have a partnership with ACE, and we offer scholarships.
Oh, wow. That's great.
To their interns and also to people in some of their fellowship programs. And we've also tried to give away we have given away quite a few free memberships or seats in the class to people in underserved sort of communities, people who haven't traditionally been able to get into the film business, get their foot in the door.
Yeah, I love that.
So we do that. We do that with the Blue Collar Post Collective, and we're working with some other organizations to do that as much as possible.
Awesome. Well, Lawrence, thanks so much, man. And I mean, that program sounds amazing. And I really love that you make it interactive and that it's not something that you just throw up that people can just sign up for
that makes
do.
a big difference. That's very different.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, because that's the kind of experience that you actually want, when you're getting started or you're trying to learn something, is you want the mentorship, and I think that's probably worth, I don't know what it costs, but that's worth the price tag alone, just to have that kind of, the feedback, because that's what you need when you're getting started.
Yeah. And again, especially in this day and age, you really, you need to build a community of sort of teammates and future teammates and coworkers and stuff. So we try to encourage that. And, it seems to be going pretty good. We've put almost 400 people through the course in over 30 countries. So we're pretty psyched.
Wow.
Yeah, thanks.
Nice. So, Master the Workflow, check that out if you want to be an editor or an assistant editor. It sounds like a really great place to start. Or even if you've already started, or someone like me who's like
definitely
in the corporate world but's never been inside anything close to a studio editing room before. I think
the etiquette thing sounds like worth the price of admission, because that's just something that you just might not, you don't know what you don't know, right? You have no idea how to talk to these people if you've never been in a room with them.
Yeah, exactly. And when to talk to them and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And we actually get a lot of people from, different editing worlds, corporate trailers, promos. A lot of people coming out of reality TV want to work in scripted.
Oh, wow.
So, we've had a lot of success with that.
And Sextuplets, you said, is coming out later this year. Is that right?
August 16th in 190 countries and on Netflix.
Wow.
Near you.
On Netflix. Nice. Yeah. So is there a trailer out for Sextuplets that we can post as well?
Not yet, but I'll shoot you an email. And I'd love to find out, more about you guys. So, I did check out your website and stuff. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah. Stay in touch, and
absolutely.
And I will certainly let you know when that trailer's up.
Yeah, we can add it to the show notes later, and then we can also just do a shout out on Twitter and our Facebook page when the trailer comes out, and
definitely.
remind people to listen to this episode if they haven't yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And I think you guys, you sound like you have a great show, and I love people who love film like you guys. So it's been really fun talking to you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Oh, well, thanks, Lawrence. Thanks so much for taking the time. It's been an honor, really, to talk to somebody who's, been in the business so long, worked on so many amazing films, a lot of which I've seen when they came out, and it's just like, I wish I could talk to you for 3 hours. I could ask a million questions.
Well, we'll get together. We'll have a drink or something.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Oh my God, I would love that.
Okay.
Yeah, I gotta get my butt to Los Angeles. But soon.
Sounds good, man.
So thanks for everyone for listening, and thanks again to Lawrence for being on the show.
Big thank you.
Oh yeah, huge. And everyone check out Master the Workflow and Sextuplets. And then if you haven't seen, Naked or, what's the other one? 50 Shades of Black. Yeah, check those out. And then of course all of Lawrence's other films.
Yeah, Lawrence, are you on Twitter or Instagram or any of that?
Well, we have Master the Workflow on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So yeah. Just check us out. We're there.
Great.
Awesome. We'll add that to the show notes as well. And you can find us at makingmoviesishard.com, where you can find the links to the things we talked about in this episode, including all the trailers and Master the Workflow and all that good stuff. If you want to get in contact with us, you can send an email to podcast@makingmoviesishard.com, or you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at MMIH Podcast. And I'm Ulrich B on Twitter and Instagram. And Kellerman, you are...
Kellerman Writes a Lot on Instagram.
And please, if you like the show, tell a friend. Help us get the word out. You can leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher. And thanks again.
There's a Patreon.
Oh my God, yes, there's a Patreon.
Stop forgetting the Patreon.
I know. I don't give the Patreon enough love. And thank you to the patrons who are loyal patrons. I really appreciate it.
I love access to a special Facebook group. That's a great idea.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great idea.
That's a hot tip, as you'd say.
It's a hot tip for us.
Yeah, that's a hot tip.
Do it.
All right. Well, thanks again, Lawrence and Kellerman. And yeah, everyone, have a great night.
You too. Thanks a lot, guys.